You know, well, first, I should know that, yeah.
I'm a real fan of Resident Alien.
I've not seen that.
You know, the producer of that is a guy who was on Voyager. Yeah, Robbie Duncan McNeil. Yeah. So it's on my list. I've been meaning to watch it. So.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. Okay, now we're gonna get to the last most thrilling of the events that to this week and next week that we're gonna cover. The wars. Just come on. That's what makes history so, that's the thing that catches everybody's attention. For me.
Yes.
And for you again.
Other people,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
war is the thing that people pay attention to. So that's
yes. Okay, so where we left off last week, okay, we talked about the First Persian War. Talking about how you had the rebellions along the western coast of modern day Turkey with the Greek city-states that were there that ended up pushing Darius I, the Persian king, to decide to launch a war against mainland Greece in order to crush those city-states that helped the rebels. We talked about how his forces defeated at Marathon, and that's really where the First Persian War ends. Darius himself did not lead this expedition. He ended up having generals to do this. And when the Battle of Marathon, is lost by the Persians, for them, it's not really the spectacular loss. It's not, it's not something that's really in the Persian mind. It's not anything that really stops them that much, because the Persian Empire stretches from India in the east all the way into southeastern Europe. So this is a huge empire. In one small battle on the border, technically, for them is not that big of a deal. But what will end up happening is that he would have to go through and organize another expedition. He ends up dying before he can do that, though.
Yeah, his son Xerxes succeeds him in 486.
Yeah. So in 486 to 481, Xerxes is in the process of assembling this new expeditionary force. This is much bigger than what his father had done. Okay, so we're looking, according to the Greeks with Herodotus, they're talking about how the army and the camp followers are, over 2,641,000 people. One thing you got to remember with the Greeks and Romans when they discuss, they exaggerate crazy because it makes it more glorious if it looks like they're going to be completely overwhelmed with it.
Mhm.
That's not saying that this was not a huge military force that Xerxes put together. It's entirely possible that it could have been from 100,000 to 250,000 when it comes to, the number of soldiers and sailors that are going to be involved in this. To have, 2.5 million men in this period, not that the Persians couldn't pool that many people, but, think of all of the food, the fresh water, the tents, everything that they would need in order to move an army like this. They would never get anywhere. Seriously, because
By the time the front of it got there, the back of it would still be starting out.
yes, and that's the thing. Like when the Romans, in the Republic and the Empire, when they're getting ready to fight, they're talking about having maybe most of the time there's maybe 30,000 legionaries. The front of the column starts and then it stretches back miles. And like Christy was saying, by the time the front of the column gets to where that camp is at, the back is still hours behind in order to catch up. So you can't have that big of a force to go through. The other thing is too, I kind of mentioned how with, Darius's dynasty, he killed the original Persian royal family. So when Darius dies, Xerxes, for the first couple of years of his reign, has to ensure that all of his governors and generals are going to be loyal to him when he takes over. So that's why it takes this 5-year period. He's basically asserting in his own territory that he is the dominant power. Now, what ends up happening in the after effect of the First Persian War, Athens is the hero of this war. It is the prominent Greek city-state because it's really the only one that fought a major engagement with Persians. Forget the fact that all their allied hoplites who were with them were wiped out in that battle. It only matters that Athens survived and that they turned back this invasion. And so they kind of take the lead in what is going to happen for the Greek preparations leading to the second Persian War. And the idea is putting together kind of this thing that's called the Hellenic League. Again, when we're looking at the term Greek in Greece, that's the English term for the area. The Greeks themselves, they call themselves the Hellenes, okay, which echoes back to Helen. And so they end up forming the Hellenic League. And so this is a coalition. It's an alliance of all the city-states in mainland Greece and a lot of the islands, basically saying that if the Persians come back, then the Greeks band together in order to defend each other. Okay, and Sparta is a lot more open to moving this army out of its home territory because they were humiliated by the fact that they didn't fight in the First Persian War. And if they're supposed to be the elite, militaristic society, that reflects poorly on them. And so they're afraid that if they don't get more actively involved in the future Persian War, then their helots, these people that they've enslaved in their territory, are probably going to rebel. And Sparta's allies would not help them in that.
No,
So
we'd help the helots.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so for the Spartans, they're looking at it as, okay, we have to take an active role. We actually have to be in this area. Now, the Persian invasion itself has kind of a false start because what is going to end up happening is that you have the Persian army and you have this massive Persian fleet that has also been assembled. And they have to go also here. Okay. This area that's the Hellespont. This is where basically you have a waterway that is separating, okay, Asia from Greece. For Xerxes to have his army cross, he ends up building pontoon bridges. He actually has boats anchored, and then they build a road over top of the boats in order to move the soldiers, the horses, elephants, supplies in order to get across. Well, the first bridge that they end up building is destroyed in a storm. And then, again, according to Herodotus, Xerxes goes to the water's edge and then whips the water because he's punishing the god of the sea for wrecking his first round of it. Rebuilds the bridge, and then what will end up happening is instead of having these two forces go separate, as they had in the First Persian War, they're going side by side so that they can protect and supply each other as they're moving towards Greek territory. The Persians end up those kind of, what was it, the cousin kingdoms of the Greeks, the Thracians, the Macedonians, the Thessalians, okay, the people who are to the north and northeast that are in the line of march for the Persians, they basically become vassals to the Persians because they do not want their territories destroyed.
The king of Macedonia, no, one of the generals, excuse me, one of the Macedonian generals meets Xerxes' army at the border and functionally surrenders immediately and offers one of his daughters if they'll just leave them alone.
Because again, for the Greek world, this whole area, this is a drop in the bucket compared to what is east of them. Like I said, the Persian Empire at this time is the biggest world empire, with almost, nothing to stop them. And so as these, Persian forces are moving into Europe, what ends up happening is that the Greek city-states, they have feelers out. Okay, so they know what's happening in the neighboring northern kingdoms. And then they start to scramble because they have to go through the process. The Greeks themselves have to go through the process of starting to assemble their own armies and then their own navies. And then they have to coordinate them. Because again, each city-state has its own military. And it's already been kind of decided that the Athenians will be the ones who are in charge of naval operations. Spartans will be in charge of the land forces. The problem is that it takes time to move all of these forces from their home cities to places where they can block. And because you don't have fighting in the north, the Persians are not slowed down. So they're able to move a lot quicker than people were coming into. Again, when it comes to how each of these, forces end up fighting. For the Greeks, we talked about how they had the heavy infantry. Okay, where they fought in that phalanx, where you have these guys with the shields that cover from basically their neck to below their groin. And then they, stand shoulder to shoulder and they just push towards an enemy line. The Persians don't fight that way. Yes, they have spearmen, but what it boils down to for the Persians is because of how large that empire is, and the fact that, the territory they cover, a lot of it is open plains. The thing that's important for the Persians, oh, that's okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, you're good. The thing that's important for the Persians is cavalry. So they don't have heavy infantry. This is kind of the crazy thing about it. Before the Persian Wars, before the Greeks and the Persians were fighting each other, the Persians hired Greeks as mercenaries to help support their army. Okay, most of the Persian infantry is very lightly, equipped in terms of armor. Most of their, clothing is going to be, cloth. It's linen. It's not bronze armor. It's not iron because again, for the most part, there's no state armories that's, going to go through and produce. For the Persians, they rely on cavalry. They rely a lot on ranged weapons, archers. Okay. If you're in the Persian upper class, you're going to be either in the cavalry or you're going to be part of this elite unit that's called the Immortals. There's 10,000 of them. And these Immortals are basically the bodyguards for the Persian kings. And the reason why they call them Immortals is that if some of them are killed in combat, there's always someone else who's going to join those ranks, okay, as they go through. Generally, the aristocrats are better armed because they can afford to have better equipment, where the lower classes are basically, unfortunately, think of it, they're conscripts, they're farmers who are being pulled in. Maybe they're given, an additional shield, they're given a shield or they're given spears instead of bows and arrows or, whatever they're bringing with them as they go through. Because of how quickly the Persians are advancing, there's not enough time for all of the Greek city-states to assemble their full militaries and get them into position. There are some places, though, where the Greeks are going to have an advantage. Basically, I kind of talked about how the terrain of Greece really influences how that culture comes in. It's a lot of mountains. In one of these areas to get into northern Greece is this pass that's called Thermopylae, and to translate out, it's the hot springs. This is a really narrow valley to go through. On one side, you've got mountains. On the other side, you've got to drop off to the ocean. This is where the Greeks are going to try to hold the Persians off. It's not the full Greek army, it's a portion of it. They're there to hold up this Persian invasion force for as long as they can, so that all of the other Greek city-states can start moving their militaries into position to fight. Okay. Now, initially, when the Greeks get there, there's 7,000 soldiers. Okay, this is where how many of you heard of the 300 Spartans? Okay, it's not just 300. There's 7,000 Greeks thrown in there. It's just that the 300 Spartans are the 300 professional soldiers. The rest of them are volunteers as they go through. We kind of talked about how with Sparta, they have the two kings. The one who's going to lead the Spartans at Thermopylae and all of the other Greeks is a man named Leonidas. The other Spartan king stays back in Sparta in order to keep raising more reinforcements. Okay, and again, it's that idea that you don't have both generals in the same battle at the same time. That way, if you lose the battle, you potentially at least have one surviving part of the leadership cast.
Is there any truth to Leonidas's wife saying if he lost, had to come back on his shield?
Yes.
Come home, yeah.
Yeah, that is
Victorious or on your shield.
Yeah, that is a Spartan saying that, you Spartans don't retreat. You either win or you die on the battlefield.
Yeah. So whether or not his wife actually said that to him, we can't know, but it is something that we read about the Spartans saying to each other.
So Thermopylae is in the kind of northeast part of Greece, right along the Aegean Sea coastline.
Go back to the other
I'll
one.
go back to the slide. Okay, so if we're looking at it, also over here, Thermopylae is right here. Okay, there's so you have this Persian army that's coming through, again, much larger than the Greeks as they come in. You have the Persian navy also shadowing along the coastline. The Athenians had assembled the Greek navy and were sitting off this island of Euboea, this island right here. Okay, around here, in order to try to intercept, okay, the Persian navy. What ends up happening is another storm rolls in. The Greeks are able to shelter along the shoreline. The Persians are not able to do that. And a lot of their fleet is destroyed before a fight even starts. Now, one of the things that, I haven't mentioned, okay, is that even though, there's this Hellenic League, the idea that all of these city-states are going to fight against the Persians, that's a theory. The reality is a lot of the city-states are looking at this as this is an impossible fight. And there's the question, do we fight the Persians and be annihilated? Or do we negotiate with them and let them pass through our territory and destroy Athens and Sparta? One of those city-states is this city that's named Thebes. It's probably the third or fourth biggest city-state in the mainland of Greece. And it is the northernmost, closest to where, closest to Thermopylae. Athens and Sparta already know there are Theban diplomats negotiating with Xerxes to allow them to pass through his territory. Of those 7,000 soldiers who are part of the army, the Greek army that's at Thermopylae, there's a considerable portion of Thebans there. So what ends up happening is that the Greeks disarm the Thebans who are their allies and hold them as hostages because they cannot trust them. And they're correct about this. Now, again, because of the way the terrain is set up, there's not a lot of paths. There's no roads that really kind of easily lead around Thermopylae. There's fortifications that have been built there before that have kind of fallen into ruin. And so the idea was that the Greeks would rebuild these fortifications along the mouth of the pass and then use that as the area they're going to hold. As the Persians come in, they're not able to deploy their full armies because the pass is not big enough for everybody to go in. And so they have to keep coming in small waves, which makes it to a degree easier on the Greeks because this is very similar to how they fight. Because there are so few Greeks compared to it, not every Greek has to fight at the same time. So they're always able to relieve the ones who get tired. Where the Persians, they're basically smashing against the shield wall and being killed. Okay. Before the battle starts, again, Herodotus is talking about how they're, the Persians send, ambassadors to negotiate with the Spartans, to stop it. And they threaten to basically block the sun out with arrows. And so the Spartans say, well, then we'll just fight in the shadows. It doesn't bother them. Well, over the course of, the Battle of Thermopylae, even though the Greeks are holding, they realize they're not going to be able to keep this battle going forever. There's also a traitor, a Greek, who was a shepherd, Ephialtes, who shows the Persians there are these paths to get around the Greek fortifications to get on the other side of the pass. And when Leonidas and the Spartans find out that there's a Persian force coming around them to flank them, he orders most of the Greeks to leave. Because again, the idea is that he knows that some part of the Greek army still has to fight, but the majority of it has to survive so they can fight somewhere else. And so Leonidas keeps his 300 Spartans, he keeps the Theban prisoners, and then he keeps another 1,700 Greeks, but we don't talk about them because it's not as romantic as these 300. The last day of the battle, Leonidas is killed in the fighting. And there is a massive battle over who is going to recover his body, whether the Persians get it or whether the Spartans get it. The Spartans manage to fight to where he's killed and they get his body, but by then they're getting attacked from both sides. And what they end up doing is they basically go to a spot where it's the most narrow that they could try to defend. And instead of doing a shield wall, what they end up doing is they basically start to kneel down and they have their shields around them like a tortoise shell. And then the Persians just keep firing arrows into that until they kill all of them. And then when the battle is over, usually what ends up happening is with the Persians, and even with the Greeks, if you kill a commander who is a noble, if you kill someone who's a king, generally you don't mutilate the body. You try to do the funeral rites, so that you're not offending the gods. Xerxes is so mad that this defense, held his army up for days because Leonidas' body crucified and decapitated.
And you have to remember too, that the Persians and Greeks don't hold the same gods.
Yeah.
So it's one thing when you have Greeks fighting against Greeks. We don't want to offend the gods. The Persians, they're not worried about it. The other thing to know about this is that this was believed to be a myth for a very long time. Until it was the late 19th century, there were archaeological expeditions done at Thermopylae, and they actually found bodies of men in the way that Herodotus describes. So they were kind of left where they lay, and it, time took over. So
Wasn't the Persians though, that when they were bottled up, I mean, they were still hand-to-hand type fighting.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's where the Greeks had the advantage.
The archers, when Xerxes finally said, I'm not losing any more men, that's when he brought the archers into.
Yeah, generally what they would do is, you have the infantry who'd come in, the Persian infantry that come in with their spears, and then there's the archers who are behind them, and they're kind of firing over the battle line. Because not every one of those Greeks is fighting in that front phalanx. There's a bunch of them who are further back. And then it's not just hoplites who are there. The Greeks have their own slingers. Each of the Spartans had their own kind of page. Okay, so basically it's one of the helots who's a slave who would get him food and water, who would get weapons to replace, their broken spears as they go through. So there's a lot more people there with the Greeks than are generally told. And the Persian cavalry, the elite force, can't get involved in this because there's no room for them to maneuver. Again, the horses are in the movies, like, you see the cavalry charge into a spear wall or whatever. Horses aren't stupid. Horses will not charge into something that looks like a solid object to them. And they're sure the hell not going to do it if there's spears pointing out to them. Horses are smart.
Okay.
Yeah, no, seriously, horses are very intelligent. They will not do that. And so that's why you don't, cavalry, again, there's this mythology that's developed in the medieval age that, the knights in heavy armor, they, try to punch through an enemy line. Some of them do that. But for the most part, cavalry is used to come in on the flanks, because that's where the defenses are the weakest. Or they're used when the enemy breaks, and then you run them down and you kill them from behind as you go through there. So Leonidas and the 300 Spartans are killed, and the Persians start moving towards that city of Thebes, and instead of Thebes fighting, Thebes surrenders. And basically says that it's, it will supply the Persians with whatever materials, whether it's men or supplies, to help them fight against the other city-states. And then there's a crisis with the remaining Greeks. What do we do? The Spartans are looking at it as our best chance to hold, the Persians off is to not fight, okay, in the main part of Greece, but instead pull all of the civilians and all of the soldiers out and go to the Peloponnese, that peninsula where Sparta is at, because there's it's another really narrow piece of land that connects that peninsula to the rest of Greece. And it has a lot of fortifications on it. multiple walls that separate it. The Athenians don't want to do that because they look at it as if we abandon mainland, then not only is Athens destroyed, all of our allies' cities will be destroyed. And the Spartans will be the dominant Greek city-state if we manage to win. So again, politics plays into this as well as military. The Greek navy, for the most part, has not been engaged yet, so it's still pretty much fully intact. And the Spartans basically tell the Athenians, we're falling back to this area, whether you do it or not. We're pulling as many of our people and our allies and even your allies out of the area. The Athenians finally realize that they can't defend Athens. And the majority of the population is taken off the mainland. There's an island that's called Salamis. Okay, that's about about 8 miles west of Athens. And that's where all the civilian population is plopped, on this island. And there's still people who refuse to leave the city. And so what they do is they end up going to the Acropolis. They go up to that citadel, okay, the central hill that's in Athens, where all the major temples are at, where there's some fortifications. They decide to stay there. The majority of people leave. When the Persians show up, they burn Athens to the ground and they massacre the people who have stayed behind. The Athenians, okay, and the other allies, what they end up doing is the navy, all of the Greek ships, warships that are left, they have gone, okay, basically into the harbor, okay, where Salamis is located. And it's, again, it's another instance where it's really narrow, okay, for somebody to come in and try to attack them. And the Persians cannot get all of their fleet in that area at the same time to fight. And again, with the Greeks, they're masters of naval warfare as well. Okay. This is basically what warships were like in this period. They're not sailing ships. They're basically coastal vessels. They do have a mast and a sail that you can use to catch the wind if you're not in combat. But when you're in combat, your attraction is oars. Okay, and with Athens being the naval power, pretty much every citizen in Athens is either a hoplite or they're part of the Navy. And for rowers, if they can't make up for that with them, prisoners or slaves. For these ships too, you don't see, catapults, there's no cannons yet. What you end up doing is your ship is basically like a torpedo. You have a large bronze ram that is on the front of the ship and it projects outwards. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to hit that ram into the side of an enemy ship and put a hole in it and sink. Or another thing you could do, and this is something that the Greeks were very, very good at, the picture in the upper left. If you have really skilled rowers, what you do is you build up a lot of speed. And then as you come towards that enemy ship, you have the rowers on that side basically pull their oars up out of the water or out of the way. And then you use the ram to shear the other ship's oars so that you cripple them. You can try to board ships. So there's hoplites who are on board these to act as Marines. So if you get close enough, they could come over and kill the enemy crew, capture an enemy ship as you go, as the fighting goes through. What the Greeks have learned how to do is they figured out naval formations for these ships, which are called triremes. Trireme is basically translates to 3 rows. You have 3 sets of rowers on each side of the ship. And you can get, up to 7,
You can actually see kind of here.
You
can see here, there's 3 stacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, with these ships, these are not something you leave in the water all the time. When they're not in combat, you pull them out of the water and you have basically like giant sheds to hold them in, or you pull them out onto the beaches. What will end up happening is this is a trap. The Greeks force this Persian navy to come into the harbor of Salamis, a few ships at a time. And the Greeks keep picking those ships off as they come in. And this goes on for an entire afternoon. Any of the Persians who know how to swim, who manage to get off of their ships and manage to swim to the shore, are killed by the Athenians and the Greeks who are on the shoreline. Xerxes is watching this battle take place, and his navy is annihilated over the course of the day. He decides, mainland Greece for the most part, except for where Sparta is on that Peloponnese, mainland Greece has been overrun. He decides to leave Greece for the season to go back to Persia to raise more reinforcements because he's planning on continuing the war until he conquers the entire territory. That's where things kind of go wrong because this first, defeat at Salamis, while there's a huge Persian army sitting in Greece maintaining it, they don't have a lot of food. They cannot rely on the civilians that they're occupying to not fight against them. And the Spartans are still calling up all of their allies. There's still tens of thousands of Greek hoplites who can fight, who are ready to do that. In August of 479, you have two decisive battles that basically end the Second Persian War. One of them fought in Greece. Okay, and this is going to be the Spartan army and all of their allies coming out of the Peloponnese and crushing the Persian army that's occupying the territory. The other one is a naval battle led by the Athenians. And this is at Mycale. And this is off the coast of Turkey. So it's by the Turkish heartland. So you have Pelatia, which is the battle, okay, that is fought to the southeast of Thebes. And this is a crushing Greek victory because by this point, pretty much every hoplite, every light infantry, everything that Greece has is thrown into this combat. It's something that I think the estimates are somewhere around 20,000 to 25,000 hoplites plus supporting troops on the Greek side. And they're basically able to overrun and crush this Persian army. And then they go to Thebes and basically they don't do anything to the city, but what they end up doing is they force it back into the Hellenic League. Around the exact same time, you have that naval battle that's going to take place right around here, right around the area of Samos. And this is another crushing one. Okay, the crazy thing is that the Battle of Salamis destroyed the Persian navy. Within a year, it was bigger. They had rebuilt it and it was larger than it was before. And that's why the Athenians struck there, was they were trying to destroy them before that could come over and fight them. When you have these two victories, that gets all of those Ionian, those city-states that had rebelled, okay, in Turkey against the Persians to do the same thing. And then there's another part of that. Because Xerxes now has lost 3 battles within 2 years, you have a lot of Persian nobles who do not think that he is fit to be king, and so they rebel. That is more dangerous to him than what the Greeks have done. So he's going to negotiate a peace treaty with the Greeks while he goes into the interior of Persia to crush his own people, to make sure that they cannot overthrow him. And so again, it's, even though you have these battles that are being fought, on the periphery of the western part of the Persian Empire, for the Greeks, this is a major victory for them. This is the epitome of West versus East. The idea that this is where we've maintained freedom, where Greek ideals are protected from, the decadent Persian Empire to the East. And so this becomes a huge part of Greek identity from here forward, and even Western identity from here forward. For the Persians, they talk about how they're defeated in these things, but they're not pivotal battles for them because their empire is still intact. They still have more people, more wealth, and more territory than the Greeks do at this point in time. And this is really kind of, again, the split where you're seeing, the beginning of the idea of the West versus East. The idea that, the Greeks are the culturally dominant in their minds. They're the culturally dominant group. And the Persians and anyone who is affiliated with them, the subject peoples, are weak and effeminate. Even though they had this huge army, they're not able to defeat us. They couldn't beat, the idea of democracy in the most, Greek cities didn't have that, yeah. And even in the depictions, from the period and later on, the Greeks, when they're depicting themselves, a lot of the times, okay, they're in, their full hoplite panoply. Okay, this is a funny one. That's, here, this is one of those Greek pages, one of the people who basically is not a soldier, but is a servant to help the hoplites by getting water. So he's got a sword in his hand, he's coming up. This is a Persian who's mooning him. Okay, the idea that they're effeminate with it. This is one of the Persian immortals who's being killed, by a hoplite as he's coming in. This is where too we get the idea of history. Some of the earliest Greek historical works are on the Persian Wars and then the Peloponnesian Wars after. And so with Herodotus, the father of history, he actually, you can really see how he puts this history together, how that influences historians later on. He interviews people who are involved in the war to get their remembrances of what happened so that he can try to get it as accurate as possible. Again, with Herodotus, you can't really trust a lot of the stuff he's talking about because he's talking about 2.5 million Persians. He's talking about how there are dogmen or island and, in the Aegeans,
Yep.
he embellishes a lot. We get the word Sphinx for, the lion, the human-headed lion statues, the pyramids come from Herodotus because he travels around the Mediterranean to see the larger world around him in order to give a context to why Greece is the superior culture at that time.
Just one thing to remember, as Dr. Bauer says about this, in the eyes of these men, Herodotus and Thucydides, the battles of the Persian Wars are central to the development of humanity. From the Persian point of view, there were small engagements, which when they ended badly were best ignored. So you can see that in superpowers today. I mean, it's not, it's humans are going to human. That's how we function.
Yes. You crow about your victories and then the defeats are like, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. And on to the Peloponnesian Wars.
Oh.
Here's that.
Technology. Now, with this, Greek world-changing victory, the fact that they survived against this huge empire, you think everybody in Greece would be able to get along? Not a chance, because you have a lot of jealousies that come up with this, because these Greek city-states are all independent. Each of them is looking at it as which is the dominant city-state, and how is it that we're going to practice not only domestic policy inside the Greek world, but how do we practice foreign policy? How does Greece interact with all of the other civilizations that are around them? Now, again, it's that instance that yes, you have this, small Greek, coalition beating this giant Persian empire. The Greeks are looking at it as there's the potential that Persia can come back and fight another war. So Greece has to be prepared in order to be ready to defend itself, because not only is it now mainland Greece, for the most part, those Greek city-states that are on the west coast of Turkey, they have become independent from Persia too. And so that is where, as far as mainland Greece is concerned, where the next Persian War is going to take place. So, they're looking at, for Athens and Sparta, Corinth, and mainland city-states, they're looking at as we have to defend ourselves, and now we have to defend our fellow Greeks overseas. And so what they end up doing is they put together this thing that's called the Delian League. The Delian League is named because of an island that's called Delos that's in the Aegean. This is where every Greek city-state, regardless if it's in the homeland or the islands or in Turkey, this is where the kind of treasury for the Delian League is going to be located. Every city, depending on what they can supply, whether it's warships or it's soldiers or it's money. The Delian League is designed to build up the surplus of these in order to defend Greece in case Persia launches another war.
They also are trying to get money from Persia to account for the fact of how much was destroyed.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get compensation from Persia.
Yeah.
Many thousands of years before there were commercials about it.
Yeah. Athens is destroyed as a result of the Second Persian War. It has to be rebuilt. There's almost nothing left of it. Okay, all of the major civic buildings, the major temples, all of that the Persians had burned to the ground and looted. And so Athens needs the money in order to rebuild and rehouse its citizens. And for the most part, most of the Greek world is fine with that. They're looking at it as, yes, your city-state suffered the worst. You should be rebuilt to an extent. But the idea with this Delian League is that all of the city-states are supposed to be equal, on equal footing when it comes to, talking about how money is going to be distributed or how we're going to interact with the Persians or someone else. And so it's this thing, it's an idealized utopian version of what this alliance system is supposed to be. It's not going to work that way. The Greeks also, in order to ensure that the Persians don't have a foothold to the north, push the Persians completely out of Macedonia and Thessaly and Thrace and kind of incorporate those, Greek cousins, not necessarily completely into the Greek world, but they are tied to the Greek city-states. Okay, so the rulers of Macedonia and Thessaly, they have to send their sons to a Greek city-state as hostage in order to make sure that their kingdoms stay friendly. It's not saying that those, the kids who are sent are going to be mistreated or they're kept under house arrest. In a lot of cases, they're educated just like the elite of the Greek city-states
We
would
will
be.
see that later with Alexander's father, Philip. Yeah.
The other thing that they end up doing is they clear out the pirates that are in the Aegean Sea. You have the Second Persian War. You have, again, even Greeks. A lot of people who are looking at this is a great way to make money because you could raid merchant ships and they just disappear. You can raid coastal settlements and take slaves and take the movable wealth that's in there. And so this Second Persian War disrupted the trade networks that were in the Aegean Seas. The Delian League crushes those pirates. Again, the idea is to try to make things as normal as it had been so that everything kind of goes back to the way it had been.
And as they're doing that, they are forcing the other city-states that have not voluntarily got involved in this to join.
Yeah. Basically, with Athens, it's an extortion racket for them because Athens has the biggest navy. So they're the ones protecting the Aegean Sea. If the city-states on the islands or even the mainland do not want to join the Delian League, they're either told by Athens or Sparta, you can join or you can be forced to join. And it would be better if you did it on your own.
There were a couple of times where they got rid of some pirates and then said, hey, we got rid of these pirates for you. Now you owe us.
Yeah.
Without, they hadn't asked for the help. So, yeah.
And again, in order to, get Athens back up on its feet, the democracy is going to be restored, but you do have someone who's going to dominate a lot of Athenian politics for the next couple decades, pushing that, Athens should be rebuilt and not necessarily rebuilt on the same scale it was before. He's looking at it as, where the city-state was the hero of the First Persian War, suffered the most in the Second Persian War and defeated the Persian navy at Salamis. Forget that it was the Spartans who actually pushed the Persians out of the mainland, that they don't matter. And so one of the things that the Athenians are pushing for is basically fortifying the city and the surrounding area so that Athens can never come under siege again. And that's going to cause tension between Athens and Sparta.
Yeah. Cimon is very much in favor of getting getting things situated so that Greece can put together an army and then go invade Persia in revenge.
Yes.
Okay, so he is pushing for this. The rest of the Greek city-states are not enthused about this idea. He tries to create a better relationship between Athens and Sparta. We'll see how well that works. And he does all this while he's pretending to continue the democracy that had been started 100 years previously.
And here's where, you know, again, the different viewpoints of these city-states diverge and are going to become major reason why Greece falls into what's called the Peloponnesian Wars. Basically, a series of wars between Greek city-states over who is dominant. For this,
The, I'm sorry,
Okay.
the city-states which are now in Sicily and Italy and stuff like that, were they part of the,
they're not part of the Persian Wars. They will be part.
no, I know, but are they part of the Delian League?
Not really.
Not really, because
No.
by that point they were kind of so far west that they were relatively independent of what was going on.
Yeah, this is, you have to remember about the colonies of that era are meant to be independent. Now,
Right.
they do get involved in the Peloponnesian Wars for sure, but the Persian War, they kind of looked at that and went, well, by the time we get there.
Is it really worth it?
Yeah.
When was Greek fire developed? Was that during
No, that's going to be
That's during the Punic Wars, isn't it?
Punic Wars, and it's not really, that's not really going to develop much until you get Byzantines.
Oh, okay.
That's we're about
Oh.
500 years prior to that. Yeah, too soon
Yeah.
for that one.
I'm thinking of what's his face with the mirrors? Never mind. Yeah.
So for, you know, Athens, they're looking at it as revenge. Okay, they want to go out and they want to destroy. Well, they're looking at it as if they do a preemptive war against Persia before it has a chance to rebuild again. Greece will be in a much better position and probably be able to take Persian territory. So Athens is gung-ho for war. They, you know, again, in order to rebuild the city, they either have to get money from other city-states, from the Delian League, or taking it from Persia. Sparta, on the other hand, is very isolationist. They're looking at it as, we've fought 2 wars so far. Forget the fact we weren't involved in the first one. Second one, we were the dominant ones in there. They're looking at it as, the war is over. Persia has given independence to the Ionian Greeks. They've said that they're not going to come after us again. We don't want to lose any more Spartans because there's only a certain number of us and we still have to control the whole damn peninsula that we're on. So we don't want our armies to go overseas because it weakens our position at home. And to a degree, when, you know, again, when you're looking at it, Sparta looks at it as look to home first. You know, they're looking at how quickly northern and central Greece were overrun. And they're looking at it as, okay, with the Delian League, yeah, fortify the islands. Make sure that there's warships and there's soldiers that can go to the western coast of Turkey. But they're looking at it as build more fortifications that will protect the Peloponnesian Peninsula where we're at, because that was how we were able to win the Second Persian War. That was basically a fortress. Let's continue keeping it a fortress and make it more formidable.
And they want all of the Greek city-states to become isolationists as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a very fundamental difference between how the Athenians are looking at it and how the Spartans are looking at it.
Yeah.
The Spartans don't even want to like go after the Persians for any kind of revenge.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're saying at one point they even argue that the Greek cities on Asia Minor
Should
all
be
of those people
evacuated.
should come back into proper
Yeah.
Greece.
Pull them back to the Greek homeland. That way there's no reason why the Persians and Greeks would interact with each other anymore.
Yeah.
So Sparta's like, we won the war, pull everybody back to the original border in that spot, and then we don't have another one.
Mhm.
Now, initially with Athens, because they're not able to get a lot, again, these are the 2 superpowers in Greece, Athens and Sparta. All of the other city-states are kind of looking to see which one is going to be correct. So for Sparta, they already had their allies before the wars. Athens has the same thing. and they're trying to pull in the ones that have not come into either camp yet. When Cimon realizes that nobody is really willing to put together this expedition to go and fight the Persians in their homeland, he's like, all right, we'll tone it down for a little bit. We'll use some of the money to fortify, different regions. But one of the things that Athens ends up doing, this is kind of where you see the golden age of Athens. So where the Parthenon, the ruins of that massive temple nowadays are on the Acropolis in Athens. This is when that's being rebuilt, along with other temples and other civic buildings. The money is coming in from the Delian League to rebuild it. Sparta does not mind that Athens builds city walls, rebuilds them to defend themselves. But what ends up happening is Athens is inland. It's 7 miles inland. There's a port called Piraeus that is Athens' gateway to the sea. That's where the Athenian navy is located. This is where all the merchant ships that bring goods to and from Athens dock. And there's a 7-mile stretch between those two cities to move those in. Athens starts constructing what are called the Long Walls. Piraeus has city walls that are built. And then there's a 7-mile double wall built connecting those two cities so that they cannot be cut off from each other. And that starts freaking Sparta out, because they're looking at it as, if Athens has this massive series of fortifications like that, if Athens turns on other Greek city-states, we can't put them under siege and defeat them. Okay. So you have these long walls, these giant walls that basically for 7 miles enclose a roadway. So you have the walls and you have fortifications along them to make sure that no one can scale those walls either. Okay. And then Athens starts to get more and more greedy, because as they're rebuilding the city and they're building the long walls, they start using the Delian League as their bank. And when they're running out of money, this is where things go wrong.
I see, I got ahead of myself there.
Okay.
I got ahead of us.
One of the, again, what is happening too in, in Western Turkey is those Ionian city-states, they're nominally granted independence by the Persians. They can have their own foreign and domestic affairs. For the most part, what is happening is Athens is trying to get them to be kind of the buffer states between Athens and Persia. So they're trying to militarize those city-states too. Trying to get them to raise armies and navies and raid into Persian territory. Basically spark a war is what Athens is looking at. The Spartans are looking at it as, if this is going to be an area of constant tension between us and the Persians, abandon those cities. Force the Greeks who have settled there to come back home. That's why the first Persian War started. The second Persian War was in response to that. These jerks are still there. And Athens is still riling them up. And again, in a lot of cases, the Greek city-states that are on this coastline are bigger than the Greek cities, the mainland cities. So they're considerably larger. What will happen too is that as Athens is pushing this more aggressive agenda, they're forcing the smaller cities to contribute more money to the Delian League so that Athens can use that money to build the long walls and to rebuild the temples, to rebuild Athens itself. A lot of these Greek city-states who were either neutral towards Athens or Sparta, or even were friendly towards Athens, start looking to Sparta to be the counterweight. Because they're looking at it as Athens is the only other city in Greece that has a chance of fighting against Athens and winning, much less surviving on its own.
Sparta.
Yeah, Sparta. Yeah.
So the Persians pushed back, but Xerxes had recently been killed. There's my note here. Yeah, Xerxes is killed by his head guard, a guy named Artabanos. He reigns for a few days before one of Xerxes' sons, Artaxerxes, kills him. And then he has to deal with rebellions and he has to deal with consolidating his power. So the Persians kind of look at it and go,
Again, they're looking for the Persian king. He's looking at it as maintaining my power in my own territory is more important than what's going on in the periphery.
Yeah.
And the Persians do fall into this period where there's a lot of civil wars with them. And the Greeks will actually join
They
with,
use that to their
with, yeah,
advantage.
with the Persians. They will hire that they will sell themselves as mercenaries to fight in different Persian armies against each other because they're looking at it as if we can weaken Persia and we can make money off the process, it protects the homeland. Shall we take a quick break?
Oh, yeah. See the time.
Okay, it's 10:55. Let's come back at a little after 11, and then we'll get into what is going to spark this war between Greek cities.
Yeah.
So I don't really care that much for Rome.
Yeah, it's the other ones that are,
You can't even get close to the older, I mean, the architect, the
architecture.
the one that dig up all the stuff, the
Oh, archaeologists, yeah.
archaeologists. The archaeologists have everything fenced off and.
Can't get, yeah, I can't get near anything. Okay, all right, well, let's gonna hop back in and we'll talk about what it is exactly that sparks Athens and Sparta going after each other. And it's kind of surprising who the villain in this is as we go through. So let's go there. Now, in reality, again, you know, the way that the perfect version of this Dalian League is that every city in this league is supposed to be equal. But in reality, it's either Athens or Sparta they are the two most important ones. Whatever decision those two make, or if there's an impasse, that's going to affect everybody else. But what will start to happen is that Sparta, again, starts to look more towards what's happening in its own territory. Again, it's a kind of isolationist idea. They're looking at it as the allies we already have in our in that peninsula that we're in. We'll take care of them. And if Athens wants to, you know, to go against the Persians, they can do that. When we're looking at this map, everything that is in the purple, these are city-states and regions that are allied to Sparta. Okay, so basically it's the idea that they're looking at it as, yes, we're part of this Dalian League, but Sparta is the one that kind of determines what we're going to do, whatever it is a policy. And a lot of these city-states don't want to go over into Persian territory themselves. They're looking at it as stay home, build our own defenses up, try to normalize what's going on with it and let it go. Everything that is in the orange, those are the territories that are going to follow Athens. Okay, and what starts to happen is that Athens becomes very aggressive when it comes to the smaller cities in the Dalian League. Okay, so every year, as part of this league, you have to contribute whatever it is to go to Delos to be in that, in basically, you know, that repository. If you cannot pay that or you won't pay that, the Athenian Navy shows up or the Athenian army shows up and they take it. And if you keep falling behind or you say you don't want to be part of the Dalian League, as time goes on, the Athenians will send their army in to overthrow the local government and put in Athenian collaborators. Or in the most extreme version, the Athenians will take the existing population out of that city and enslave them, and then put in Athenian colonists to replace them. So the Dalian League is starting to become a de facto an Athenian empire. They're starting to control it. And so you start to see even cities that are aligned to Athens starting to get worried. And so they're starting to reach out to Sparta. If Athens attacks us, will Sparta defend us? And Sparta is kind of caught in this position because, again, they're looking at it as we don't really want to fight against, well, I mean, they fought each other before, but for the Spartans, they're looking at it as fighting Athens is going to be damaging. Because if Athens and Sparta fight and the Spartan army loses, then the Athenians are going to get the helots, those slaves that are forced to work for the Spartans. They can potentially get them to rebel. And then Sparta's in a really bad spot. So Sparta is looking at it as we'll try to keep things as quiet and calm as we can. If things do come to a head, though, Sparta and their allies would be willing to march. In this period, okay, it's not, again, Christy's kind of talking about this, it's not just one war. This is a series of wars that take place over generations. Because it's not, a lot of these are not campaigns that are going to be going all year round. Again, your fighting season is mostly late spring, summer, and early fall. And then the soldiers have to come back to collect the harvest. And again, they don't have the ability to keep these men in the field during winter. The war is sparked by Athens, by what it ends up doing. Again, I was kind of talking about this, where you have these smaller, cities on these islands in the Aegean, okay, in the water that separates Greece from Turkey. A couple of them have refused to contribute to the Daily League because they understand what is going on. The first one, the Athenians go in and they overthrow the government. The second one, the Athenians go in and they conquer the city. Basically, they enslave the population and then put Athenian citizens in that to replace them. That's just going to get Sparta involved in the war because they're looking at it as if Athens is going to start attacking these smaller ones. It's only a matter of time before they start going after the cities that are on the mainland. And Will Durant has a really good quote to this. Some subject cities and others that had feared to become subject appealed to Sparta to check the Athenian power. The Spartans were not eager for war, knowing the strength and valor of the Athenian navy, but the old racial antipathy between the Dorian and Ionians inflamed them. And the Athenian custom of establishing in every city democracies dependent upon the empire seemed to be the land-owning oligarchy of Sparta a threat to aristocratic government everywhere. Like I was saying, the Athenians, when they go in, they replace the existing government with people who will toe the Athenian empire's line. Okay, and the new rulers have to stay friendly to Athens in order to control those cities. So the Athenians are saying that they're putting democracy in these cities. What they're doing is they're putting in sycophants. They're putting in people who will follow whatever Athens says, regardless of what the people in those cities want. So in 457, this is going to be the event that sparks the war. Okay, you have this this territory. Okay, this is called Boeotia. This is, let me get the area here. Okay, this is kind of central Greece. This territory is split between cities that are allied to Sparta and cities that are allied to Athens. Athens is, okay, in this part of Greece, southeastern Greece, called Attica. They do not want the Spartans to gain any more allies in this region. The Spartans do not want the Athenians to push any deeper into Boeotia because they're looking at it as, this is kind of the buffer zone for our two city-states. What will end up happening is that the Athenians start to make, aggressive moves. They've already, overthrown some of the islands in the Aegean, and the Spartans decide that they're going to send a limited military force out of their territory, basically as a show of force. It's not initially sent out to fight. It is sent there to intimidate the Athenians, because the Spartans are sending that military force to one of their allied cities. It's the idea, basically saying that, look, we don't want to go to war, but we can if you really want to. And they're hoping that the Athenians will, be cowed by this bluff. And it is not going to end up happening. This little city was called Doris. There, they had been an Athenian subject. They asked the Spartans to send the Spartan army there to basically defend them. Athens takes that as a direct military threat. The Athenians send their army out, and the Spartans don't even get to the city that they're supposed to go. There is a battle that ends up taking place, which is not decisive, because there's both sides claim victory, but no territory changes hands. There's no, massive celebration about what ends up happening. But this is the spark that is going to start it, because now both of them have gone against each other. There has been blood that is going to be shed. And what ends up happening is that Athens okay, has its navy. So it decides to go into an indirect type of warfare. It is not going to send its army into the battlefield to fight the Spartans because they have fewer troops than the Spartans and their allies, and they don't want to risk that. But what they will do is the Athenian navy is sent out to start raiding and burning the coastline of all of Sparta's allies, because Sparta really does not have a navy to defend itself. And so you have this 9-year period where you're having fighting that takes place from spring and summer and fall each year. And a lot of times, none of the cities are actually conquered. What ends up happening, and there's no decisive battles, it's a series of raids. You know, you're kind of hitting where the enemy isn't. The Spartans and their allies are able to go into Attica. They're able to go into the Athenian heartland. And they're able to destroy a lot of for the whistle, they're able to destroy a lot of the fields and orchards that the Athenians rely on. But they can't actually storm Athens itself. So there's a lot of damage to, you know, the agriculture in the region, which is going to cause famine. The armies then retreat, okay, when it starts to become early fall because they have to come back to get their own harvest. And so you have this on and off period of war for 9 years. The Athenian navy, while this, you know, the Spartans and their allies are sitting outside Athens, the Athenian navy is raiding the entire Peloponnese, destroying cities, enslaving populations as they can, and then retreating before the Spartans can respond. So again, it's kind of this instance that you see Athens as kind of, you know, the way they describe it, Athens is the whale. It controls the oceans and can hit anywhere it wants to from the oceans. Sparta is the elephant, really powerful on land, sucks in the water and can't do anything. Now, for the most part, this first Peloponnesian War, yes, it's 9 years long. There's a lot of raids. There are no real decisive battles where one side or the other can say that they have won something. Again, territory is not really changing hands. They're just burning everything to the ground. Okay, and you have city-states that are going to flip-flop between Athens and Sparta because they're looking at it, which one is going to be more advantageous to us. For the most part, most of the Spartan allies stick with Sparta. Athenian ones kind of flop back and forth. In 446, because there have been no real large-scale battles, there's been no, you know, decisive victory where one side is really heavily defeated. Athens and Sparta start negotiating with each other for a ceasefire and a peace treaty. They're looking at it as, okay, we've done enough damage to each other. Nothing has really changed hands, but we've shown that we're willing to kill each other if we need to.
Yeah.
And they basically end up going through the process of saying that when this peace treaty comes in, neither side gets any territory from the other. Things go back to the way they had been before, but Athens is not supposed to go after other city-states.
Athens does give up and when I say give up, meaning allowed to be independent, the Spartans don't get it. They give up many of the possessions that they have outside of the peninsula of Attica. Okay, so their immediate territory, but most importantly, they allow the cities that are on the Peloponnesian coast that they had taken and along the Isthmus of Corinth, they allow them to go. So the Spartans look at that and go, okay, we had these groups that were right here, you know, these cities that were allied to Athens that were far too close. And so the Spartans are happy with this. And this is as happy as anybody is. And this is supposed to last 30 years. And it doesn't. But now we trade spots because this is cultural.
Yes, I want to go through that.
All right, so this is classical Athens. This is, if you learned anything about Greece in school, if you learned about the philosophers and all of that, this is that era. Okay. And it centers around democracy, basically. And the democracy of Athens is limited to citizen men who could show that both parents themselves were citizens. Okay. Now, keep in mind, of course, for citizen men, that means something. So we'll get into citizen women women who are born of citizen men are assumed to be citizens for the sake of producing more citizens, but they don't actually have any benefit from that. Okay. I think that followed, yeah. So all male citizens are subject to the possibility of serving on juries or in elected office. Of course, the elected offices usually go to the richer and more powerful people. You weren't supposed to campaign. You weren't supposed to, like, you could say you present yourself as a candidate for office, but other than that, it would be gauche to tell people why you should vote for them. So every once in a while, you do get some people from the middling class who get up into those positions. And elected officials get held to account at the end of their terms of office. And they could be prosecuted for anything they did while in office, if it was deemed illegal by other people in Athens. And if it's bad enough, they could be ostracized, which is, I think we talked about that last week. You get kicked out of the city for a decade. Okay. So as Will Durant says it, to an Athenian, a citizen is a man who not only votes, but takes his turn by lot and by rote as magistrate or judge. He must be free, ready, and able to serve the state at any time. And of course, none of this is paid, right? So that's a big part of it too. Why you see the upper classes going, why you see these political positions going to the upper classes, because they can afford to have work that isn't paid. So you see the same thing in Rome. No. So then we get to women in Athens. Okay. We are talking about the least free women in the entirety of the ancient world. Okay. There's really nowhere that holds their women as imprisoned as the way that the Athenians do. Now, keep in mind when I'm talking about this, that we're looking more at the middling and upper classes. Okay. People who have means and who have money, where they are concerned about making sure that that money goes to their heirs specifically, as opposed to, somebody else's. And we talked about that part of it. So, of course, the primary purpose of women in this era is to produce more men. Athenian girls were married very early. Okay. You were marriageable as soon as you started your period. There was generally an understanding that they didn't marry them off until 12. Okay. You did see some push for a little bit later. They did recognize that the younger a woman starts, a younger girl starts having pregnancies and producing children, the more likely she is to die in the process of doing that. So you have fewer being married toward the younger end of that spectrum, but not by much. Yeah. They married men who were already established. Men had to be established in order to get into these marriages. So you do not have two 12-year-olds marrying each other. You have a man in his 30s marrying a girl. Okay. They would have thought nothing of this. We immediately identify that, of course, as a terrible pedophilic thing, but for them, this was normal. Okay. Athenian women were very little educated. Okay. It was, if an Athenian, particularly like an upper class Athenian woman, it would be a point of pride that she didn't read. Ideally couldn't, but didn't. Okay, either way. She might be a little bit numerate depending on how much of a household she has to take care of. Making sure that the slaves are going out and they're not taking the money that's supposed to be spent on groceries and stuff. But that's it. That's it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just out of curiosity. I wonder what happened to a girl that if she just kept producing females.
Oh, well, eventually you die in childbirth, and no, it happened, but
I wonder if they just-
I mean, they could. That actually comes into the next point that I'm gonna make here, so that's good timing. If a man decided that he's not happy with his wife anymore, all he has to do is deliver her back to her family's doorstep. in a literal sense. The first time I heard about this in a class, I kind of envisioned like, hey, honey, let's go have dinner at your parents' place, and then leaving her there, I kind of feel like that had to have happened at some point. So if a man is unhappy with his wife, that's, yeah, yeah, that's one of the reasons that he could divorce her. So if she produces, this is your 8th girl, you're not doing it for me, so. Of course, he's responsible for those children in some form or, financially responsible minimally. Whether they went with their mother would be dependent on how old they were and whether her family was willing to take them. Yeah. Now, if a woman wants a divorce, she's just SOL. Okay. Technically speaking, okay, a woman could ask for permission for a divorce from the Archon in cases of extreme cruelty. Okay. Now, extreme cruelty did not mean that her husband was beating her to a bloody pulp. Extreme cruelty would be he is doing damage to our sons and thereby possibly interfering with the correct inheritance line, because the state has to care. Okay. And the state does not care if a man in Athens beats his wife. State cares if he's potentially killing his son. Now, here's the thing. Okay. He had the right to kill his son if he believed his son was doing something that was worth killing him over. There was no, like with Rome, there's not really a public prosecutor. You don't have the state versus so-and-so, okay? So in these cases, if somebody wanted to bring suit, you had to have somebody to do it, okay? For the most part. So you could you could petition for divorce in that way. There are a few instances in the records where we see women getting a divorce on the basis of cruelty. The other thing they could do, okay, is go back to, so their father's still alive or their oldest brother, whoever is head of their natal family, okay, and request of that man that he arrange a divorce for her, okay. This is more often how it happened if and when it happened, when it happened at all, which was rare. She had no say in the matter, but she could go and say, look, this is not working out. And if her father did not have a political or financial or whatever reason to keep her married to him, he might go to the Archon and register a divorce for her. Okay. The other side of that, of course, is that if you have a woman who is married, and let's say she's happily married, and her father finds out that he can make a more advantageous marriage with her, he can just go divorce her from her husband and take her out of that marriage. There's some politics to it. Obviously, it depends on who her husband is and what kind of power he has. But I mean, he had complete control over her. They also had responsibility then for her upkeep, and which would basically mean finding another husband for her, which is one of the reasons why the father had to get involved. Okay. A woman did not function on her own. There was no context in which that was possible, with one exception, which I'll get to in a minute. So this is women as property at its height. Okay. They are incredibly concerned about purity of lineage. That's another reason why they would marry the girls off so early. Okay, so that there was no opportunity for them to bring a cuckoo into the nest, right? Citizen women are kept out of the public eye. Okay, the way an Athenian house was set up, there would be the front facing part of it with like a door to the street, but this is your living room and maybe the husband's office and that. And if it was 2 stories, the women stayed on the 2nd story for the most part, unless, depending on, kitchen was usually on the 1st story or it was a different building. But they stayed as far away from the street as they possibly could. Okay. They generally didn't go outside unless they had an interior courtyard that shielded them from the street. Okay. Athenian women were not fed well. that was all the good food, unlike the Spartans. The Spartans are, the Spartans are giving the boys the bad food and they're giving the women the good food, so that they can be healthy and strong and produce strong Spartans. This is Athenians, the men and the boys get all the good food and the women basically get the scraps. Okay.
Even when they're pregnant,
Even when they're pregnant. Yeah.
they didn't realize it could affect the baby.
I mean, I don't want to say no, because obviously there were cultures in that era that understood like good food equals healthy women, healthy babies.
They didn't get that.
Yeah, and like when I'm saying scraps, I shouldn't say scraps. It's they didn't get the better. Yeah, no, I was going to say the better cuts of things, but no, maybe scraps is a better term for it. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with scraps. Yeah. That isn't to say they weren't fed enough, as this is not like what the Spartans were doing to their children and to their sons and making them go out and steal food, but definitely the men ate first. Let's put it that way. The men ate first and the women got the leftovers, which might not be scraps per se, but it's leftovers. Yeah. And that, that's follows on down the line with how they're treated, right? One of the things that women would do, sorry, where's my thing there? One of the main things that women would do to pass the time in this life where they can't go outside and can't read, would be to spin wool, produce yarn, produce thread, and then produce cloth. Okay, so you're constantly, women were expected to be constantly working cloth in one form or another, from beginning to end, all the way through to producing, clothing for herself and the family and her husband. So the image of a good Athenian woman is at the back of the house, producing cloth or sewing or something like that. Ideally, probably pregnant with a boy. And if there's entertainment, she might have some women who were slaves with her, who were her servants. In the more moneyed households, she might have a couple of eunuchs who were her servants. Okay, that was allowed. And those eunuchs would then, maybe one of them would be able to read, or they would recite stories. You listen to the Iliad for the 500th time. That's it. That's their purpose. The higher up you go in society, the less they have to do. But even the ones who were at the top of society would still be handling cloth. Okay. Of course, the lower down, the fewer servants you have, the more you have to do. So when you get to the point of women who are having to cook the meals for their family and do their laundry, that's where I say this is the middling and upper class women that are concerned about this. The lower class women, they didn't have slaves to send to the shops. They didn't have, somebody to do all of these things for them. So they are out in the public eye, but they don't have any property, so nobody cared.
Did the Athenians also expose the children that were not
Yes.
perfect?
You can assume, well, I won't say perfect. They were less picky than the Spartans. The Spartans were very picky. But you can assume that basically, how to put this, before the modern era, and I might even argue before the 20th century, you can assume that disabled children, that babies that are born deformed and are obviously going to be difficult to raise, or who might not make it to adulthood, are exposed, period. Okay, just assume that in every culture, in every society, because there's no other way to deal with that. Unless you're going into a family that has enough money or means to take care of. And even in that case, they might not. So that's one of the great questions about like the Emperor Claudius, why he wasn't exposed as a child. Because he was born with a club foot, and as he it didn't get any better for him. And then but because he's part of the imperial family, they raised him. So okay, so going back to, and of course, keep in mind too, that any foreign women that are in Athens for any reason, they're not being held to these standards, okay? If, if a man has only girls, okay, if he only has daughters, then technically speaking, one of those daughters can inherit the property. But it's not actually an inheritance so much as a pass-through. Because what would happen, first of all, if he only has daughters and then some of those daughters have sons, then that's fine. The property goes to one of the grandsons, okay? Usually the eldest would get the father's property and then the second one would get the grandfather's property in those instances, right? Or someone down the line. If she didn't have any sons and if she wasn't already married, sometimes if she was already married.
Or all the males are killed at war.
Yeah, or the men's killed at war, yeah. She would be married to a close relative on the father's side, okay? A cousin or an uncle, usually. All right. In that way, the property stays on the male line, okay? But there is technically a straight line down. If that makes sense, all right? So that was not a good situation to be in. So they don't so much inherit it as just hold it. Now, I did say that women did not function by themselves with one exception, and that exception is not anything a proper Athenian citizen woman would want to be associated with, and this is as a hetera, okay? The hetera were first and foremost sex workers, okay? But these were the upper class sex workers, okay? These were not the women who were out on the street plying their trade. These are the women who were being kept basically as mistresses, okay? Or they were being, they were entertainment at parties. They were often very well educated. They are usually not Athenian women, okay? They're usually foreign, often they're former slaves, okay? They are well versed in the politics of the time. They are well versed in literature, music, all of that. They usually could play a few different musical instruments. They could sing. They would carry on conversations. It was not terribly unusual for, you know, some member of the Athenian government to be having a party with his buddies in the front of the house with the heterae while his wife and daughters were in the back of the house, you know, sewing him a shirt or something. And so you have this weird situation where the only well-educated women in Athens are prostitutes. Okay. Not all, like I say, it's this very particular realm of them. Sometimes they're compared to geishas in the way that they're there for entertainment and not necessarily always sex work, but there's a difference. I don't know enough about geishas other than I have read a few people say that it's not a direct comparison. That there's more entertaining with geishas and less sex work than what the heterae were doing, but you know. There is you see in the source work a citizen woman who was perceived to be too well educated or spent too much time in the company of men who she shouldn't be, would be called a hetera. It was an insult the way somebody might say any number of other insults in English, okay? So that was something that a good Athenian woman would not want to be called. In terms of the religion of Greece, the thing that, you know, when you had your Greek mythology unit in middle school and you learned about all of the gods, it is focused on public display and maintaining the god's favor. This is a cultic religion, okay? Don't think of cultic as the way we think of cult in the modern day. This is not the people that are killing themselves to go get on the spaceship, okay? I need to come up with a more modern example of that because you guys know what I'm talking about because it was in the 90s, but the regular students don't know, yeah. Yeah, so this is not like a cult, but it is cultic in that display is the important part, okay? Making sure that you are there and making sure that the gods are happy is the important part. Whether or not you actually believe it is not. Having said that, of course, most people had no reason not to believe it, okay? It's not an environment that produces atheists. The Greek temples were perceived as the actual homes of the gods. Okay, the gods lived there. They had their rituals done there. They would have statues of the gods that they would have clothing for. They would dress them appropriately for whatever season, different occasions, all of that. Food would be left for them there, anything that they might need as gods, or sacrifices were done both on a public level and on a private level for what people needed. Okay.
You're basically bargaining with the gods.
Yes.
The gods don't have a personal relationship with you where they care about you. You're trying to appease them or you're trying to bribe them to
Yeah.
get you a better outcome on whatever it is that you want. That's not saying that you wouldn't have a particular god or goddess that you were really in favor of, that you might have like a little, votive statue in your house, a little shrine, private shrine.
The way Catholics keep saints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the
So-
most part, the large temples, that's where everybody in the city goes to show that they're pious.
Mhm. And if you don't, then you might be putting the whole city at risk of divine retribution. Because they're gonna smite you.
Because that one thing you didn't give them is gonna
Mhm.
give it.
Mhm.
That's the break point for them. They're like, damn it, Bob.
There's if you're interested in the history of Christianity, and I swear this will make sense in a moment. There's a great book called Christianity, the First 3,000 Years by Dearman McCullough. And he starts with the old cultic religions. He starts with the stuff that inspires Christianity. Okay. And so he says this about the Greeks. Greek religion was a set of stories belonging to the entire community, rather than a set of well-bounded statements about ultimate moral and philosophical values. Right. This is not, there's no commandments in the Greek religions other than give us stuff.
Yeah, think of the Greek gods and goddesses as just omnipresent, omnipotent humans.
Yeah.
They have the same characteristics and flaws that we do. And when you look at a lot of the mythology, they're drunk, they're angry, they're lustful, they do the same things that humans do. And so it's much more, the Greek gods and goddesses are a lot more relatable to what humans are compared to older gods. It's the older depictions in Mesopotamia and Egypt. There's a division. They're more humanistic.
Yeah. McCullough goes on to say this, temples were served by priests who performed local rituals for the god or gods, in an approved customary fashion, but who were not normally seen as a caste apart from the rest of the population. They were doing their job on behalf of the community, rather like other officials of the city. So in older societies, you have like a priest caste, and they hold themselves separate, and they are almost worship themselves in some places. For Greece, it was like, okay, I'm a citizen man, and I've been called upon to do the religious work for the week or whatever. I mean, it wasn't quite that flippant, but it was just part of your work as a citizen. It wasn't everybody that was doing it, but that's what it was. It was no different than, I don't know, being
copied
archon.
by the Romans.
Yes.
To a large degree.
Yes, absolutely. The Romans practiced that to an extreme. But we'll talk about that in a different class. So that brings us to Greek theater. This is done in service of the gods. Okay. The tragic and comic plays are part of the festival of Dionysus. Okay. Dionysus is the god of wine, fertility, and celebration.
He is not necessarily the role model
No.
for humans. He is what you do not want to be. You don't want to be a drunk. You don't want to be lustful. Because you're not controlling yourself.
Yeah, he's Bacchus in the Roman pantheon. So if you've ever heard of like the Bacchanalia, people just wild parties.
But he
Yeah.
wasn't as encompassing as Dionysus.
No, Bacchus was very much more about sex and wine. So then when we get to the 4th century, they added drama. Drama was defined as a combination of tragedy and comedy, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. It dealt with more personal issues. So, the dramatic plays are where you get stuff like Oedipus, okay, the Oedipus cycle. The comic plays are things like the Lysistrata. Okay,
So the plays, the drama, the debate, the plays are basically morality tales when it comes to drama. And tragedy is, usually it's.
yeah, excuse me, the Oedipus cycle is tragedy. What am I talking
That's
about?
it.
Yeah,
But the tragedy, the way that they're written, they are also moral stories because it's, the hubris of whoever the main character is and how that plays out and damages themselves, their city, however it goes through. And the crazy thing is that, again, even though all of these city-states across the Mediterranean and Black Sea are separate entities, it is not unusual for plays to travel the entire Greek world within a year.
Yeah.
And be played at every major city. And that's one of the huge things in this period, that where the Greek city-states are on the coast of Turkey, those are the ones who are producing a lot of the ones that we have left, where they actually surpass the original, the homeland Greek city-states. For philosophers, for dramatists, they're producing the big ones.
That would include some of the islands too,
Yeah.
Lesbos,
yeah, Lesbos.
Samos, or well, no, Samos is on the coastline, but yeah, it's one of those things where again, it's even though they're independent territories, they all share the same culture, and so you can have somebody write a play regarding their city state, but it's going to reflect what's happening in some other part of the Greek world. And a lot of times you'd have the major cities competing with each other to try to get these dramatists to come and perform there or write there.
and poetry and plays were part of the Olympics too.
Yeah.
So there were prizes to be had and competitions and all of that. Not always, but they started out as part of it.
Unlike Bacchus, Dionysus was sort of the god of whoopee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's goofed up. Okay, there we go. But of course, if you've learned anything about classical Athens, it's about philosophy. And philosophy is not just sitting there thinking about the world and, getting over analytical. Philosophy also included how you live your life. Okay, so kind of how we would define morality in the modern day. It also included the art of rhetoric. Okay, the ability to speak publicly. So when you're learning your philosophy, it's not just the thought process, it is how to express yourself as well.
Rhetoric is important because it's how you're bringing the crowd onto your side of an argument. You're not just saying that your argument's stupid and nobody should listen to you. You're saying it more politely why they're stupid without saying it out loud.
Your argument has flaws, and I would like to enumerate them.
Yes.
Yeah. McCullough goes on to say that, well, other cultures certainly pondered life. Okay, humans are human. We're going to ponder the meaning of life. Quote, Greek philosophy was far more all-encompassing, and its obsession with questioning, classifying, and speculating has little parallel in the earlier cultures of which the Greeks had knowledge. So they invent philosophy, basically. And of course, the big names in this, Socrates. Socrates was the one that asked everybody why, and then they kicked him out because of it.
They did the ultimate kick out.
Yeah. He asked questions of the leadership. He asked questions that encouraged the young men who followed him to ask questions, which then meant they were going home to their upper class fathers and saying, why are we doing this? And that was annoying to them. And so he was eventually tried in front of a jury of 501. So he got a full Athenian jury on charges of corrupting the youth. Yeah, corrupting the youth. He was sentenced to death, which was to be enacted by hemlock poisoning.
And he could have repented technically. They would have allowed him to go into exile. But he was like, no. And while he's drinking the hemlock, he's giving a speech.
Yes, he supposedly was doling out philosophical information to the very end. I think it's no, it's not Xenophon. Plutarch, maybe one of the biographies, says that his wife came in right before he was going to drink the hemlock, and she was hysterical and demanding of him that he not do it and that he go into exile, because he could have gone into exile like up to the moment of his death, right? And he supposedly said something to the effect of, leave me, woman, I'm going to spend my last moments with people who are not insane. So that tells you everything you need to know about how Athenian husbands and wives thought about each other. Yeah. So some of his followers developed the school of cynical thought, okay? And the cynics were ones who rejected all worldly convention and all wealth and all general comfort. The epitome of the cynics was, oh, he just fell out of my head. The epitome of the cynics, would you look up? It starts with a D. The epitome of the cynics is this guy who basically decided that he was going to live as a beggar. In a different time and place, he would have like been a Franciscan monk, right? Except for the fact that he was Diogenes, thank you. Except for the fact that he didn't follow Christian sexual mores. But at one point he is preaching his philosophy in a town square. It wasn't Athens, it was somewhere else. And the only thing he has is, oh no, he's naked because he's refusing to wear clothing because animals don't wear clothing, right? But he has a little bag with him of stuff, and he has a cup so that he can get water from the wells. And one of his students says, well, if you want to live like an animal, animals don't have cups. So then he gives his cup away, but then the people in charge of the city make him put on clothes. They make him put on like a robe. He was a great one for, this is, yeah, you gotta love ancient sources. He gets mentioned in the sources because he believed that men should just act on whatever instinct they cared to at any moment. So he would like shit in the street, excuse me, and pleasure himself in the street too, if he had the, if he felt like it. So yeah, the cynics of the ancient Greek world were not how we think of cynics today, of just being like, oh, everything sucks. Okay. They were a whole world unto themselves. And then they created out of them comes a group called the Epicureans, okay, who believed basically the opposite. They were like, everything should be about pleasure. Okay, we should have all the best food, we should have nice clothes. No information about them doing anything in the street. But yeah, so that's where we get the concept of Epicurean today as being of like with food and stuff, but it was actually a philosophical school.
In Rome, would actually spend all their money on parties and sell themselves into slavery
Yep.
after they went bankrupt.
Yep. Yep. It was.
Yeah.
It was. So of course, the best known of Socrates' pupils is Plato. Everything we have about Socrates comes from Plato. Socrates never wrote down anything that we're aware of. Plato is all of it. If you want to get really extreme, there are a few historians who believe that Socrates never existed and it was just Plato. I think that's a bit much, but that's me. He founds a school called the Academy. Okay. And this school exists from the time he founds it, which is in the 370s, give or take, BCE. And it is shut down in the 6th century by Justinian because it is not Christian. It lasts that long. This is the Academy at Athens. The painting, yeah. Okay, so this is one of the few things I know about art. This is the School of Athens. Okay, there's let's see, that's Plato and that's Aristotle, right? Socrates is not one of the ones in here. I think that's Plato and Aristotle. This is done by Raphael. Everybody thinks that this is Raphael putting himself in the painting, not sure. Didn't say. But yeah, this is most famous depiction of that, which of course comes from the 1500s. So.
And the interesting thing is this, when you're looking at the two central figures, okay, Socrates and Aristotle, you see that Socrates is pointing up, and that's his with his right hand, and that's supposed to be supposed to be his interpretation of, the humanity doesn't know what everything is going on, and you have to investigate it. Aristotle is pointing down, basically saying that the answers for what your questions are here in the world. You can actually figure out these things by actually investigating.
Yeah. Plato is the one who came up with the idea of everything having a perfect form that you would never actually see, but there's like in somewhere in the ether, there's the perfect form of a chair, and every chair that you see is a derivation of that, and it's imperfect. It's a little heavy. He is also the guy who invented Atlantis, and I do mean invented it, okay? Although there is an argument that he's talking about Santorini. But for the most part, yeah, he invented it. He also invented the Amazons. The Amazons are supposed to be a tale of what happens when you let women be in charge of things.
Warrior women.
And you know, he's depicting that as a bad thing, but you know.
He also is a political philosopher
Yes.
as well. He writes The Republic, and the Republic is not an appeal for mass democracy. Basically, the Republic is discussing how democracy is one of the worst forms of government you can have. You need a righteous philosopher king who knows how to govern to be the one in charge of an effective society. And the Republic is everybody yelling at each other and nothing getting done.
Yeah. So his most famous student is Aristotle. Aristotle founds another school called the Lyceum, which if you've taken any Romance languages, you know that that's where the word for school comes from, down through via Latin. And one of his most famous people was Alexander the Great. Aristotle's philosophy emphasized data. Okay, basically,
See, you can observe it.
yeah, observation and reason to figure out why things are going on. He believed that there was he and Plato both had the idea of the unseen mover, basically a single god that controls everything, that is not anthropomorphized in the way that the Greek gods were. And for that reason, and because of a lot of his philosophy, lined up with what would be later deemed appropriate by the Catholic Church, he's often called in Catholic circles the pre-Christian Christian. Okay. Now, having said that, he also wrote stuff that they hated. He had some work on poetry and on there was a work on poetry, and there was a work on writing plays that were actually suppressed by the church. And if you have read or seen Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, it's part of it centers around the fact that this monastery has one of the Aristotle works that they're not supposed to have, and so they're trying to hide it. Yeah. So he is the beginning of what we would think of as empirical philosophy. Yeah.
It's the idea of reasoning. Again, philosophy is the check for Dionysus, the idea that you're out of control. Philosophy is looking at the idea of how, this is what makes humanity, what makes Greek men superior, is that they can control themselves and they can reason and they can understand what's going on, where everybody else around them is the barbarian.
Aristotle is also, how to put this, he's the first reason that women's medical issues are not handled properly. And you're going to say, what do you mean? Aristotle wrote that women were malformed men. Okay. Girls were created when the pregnant woman was somehow disturbed during her pregnancy. Okay. And so that created these malformed men. And that was the only thing women were. And so, okay, so when you extrapolate that down the centuries, you see it in how medical texts from the ancient world all the way through treat women as malformed men. Okay. And it's only been in the last couple decades or so that we actually are seeing work being done about how things affect women differently than men, medically speaking. Like women, when they have heart attacks, it's not like you see on TV. It's not that, no, women have heart attacks that are often silent. Men don't tend to have silent heart attacks. I mean, it can happen. I'm not saying it's not. We're just starting to get into the idea of studying women's reproductive health beyond basically just make sure that you keep having babies or not. You know, you guys have probably read about this. It's kind of crazy, but he's the start of that because, you know, the women are malformed men. Which is one of the philosophies that the Catholic Church liked a lot. And we're at time and we're at the Peloponnesian War. Okay. See you next week. We'll finish Peloponnesian War next week. And then as much of Alexander as we can get through, I guess. Yeah. We should have done 5 weeks on this. I don't know why we didn't.
Interesting that modern medicine shows that all start the same and
Yes,
Everything starts out as a.
every zygote is female. Yeah,
yeah,
until the hormones are introduced. Yeah.
and
Yes, I'd love to go find
Also-
Aristotle and tell him that.
also it's interesting, the male produces the boys.
The
or
chromosome,
girls,
yep.
and-
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Henry VIII was killing his wives for no reason. He was the one who was throwing girls. Yes.